Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestle News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well, having a good Friday. As always, there is a ton of news stories to get into today, so let's get straight into today's story, starting off with some WWE main roster call-ups. We spoke about Damian Priest yesterday and the plans, Nick's plans. Obviously, he lost at New Year's Evil on Wednesday, but another name that could be headed to the main roster very soon is none other than former NXT Women's Champion Rhea Ripley, because WWE NXT Superstar Rhea Ripley is reportedly headed to the main roster very soon. Now, it's believed that Ripley's last women's standing match loss to Raquel Gonzalez at NXT's New Year's Evil special this week was planned to be her final appearance on the Black and Gold brand. This is according to PW Insider. Now, Ripley made some main roster appearances around WrestleMania 36 time last year and lost the NXT Women's Championship to current WWE Women's Tag Team Champion Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania 36. Word on if she's going to be headed to Raw and SmackDown, we don't know. But last night's loss, or this week's loss to Raquel Gonzalez, was booked with the idea that would be the end of the NXT chapter of her career. Now, as I mentioned previously, Damian Priest is also reportedly headed for a main roster call-up to either SmackDown or Raw, following this week's New Year's Evil loss to Karrion Kross in the opener of the show. PW Insider backed up those reports and said that the loss to Karrion Kross was booked with the idea that this would also be the end of Priest's NXT run. Now, when it comes to Damian Priest, of course, there was a story that was going around over the last few days or so, speaking about this next call-up to SmackDown, or plans for his call-up last week on SmackDown, because Priest reportedly was going to be called up for a main event segment with Kevin Owens, Jey Uso, and current WWE Universal Champion Roman Reigns. Now, in an update on this story, Dave Meltzer has reported on the Wrestling Observer Radio that Priest was scheduled to be called up to work with Owens, Reigns, and Uso on SmackDown, but the angle was nixed at the very last minute. Now, the story is that someone decided they needed a new babyface, or they needed more babyface superstars on the blue brand, and when asked from NXT who could fill that role, Damian Priest was brought up and was then decided for the call-up. Creative reportedly came up with this storyline where Priest was supposed to come to SmackDown as Kevin Owens' best friend to assist him in the feud with Reigns and Uso, and they were actually booked to work a tag team main event on last Friday's show. Now, Priest reportedly was at SmackDown last Friday and ready to go, but Kevin Owens spoke up and essentially said it made no sense for Priest to be his new best friend. Owens reportedly mentioned how they have nothing in common, how they could still do the angle, but there wasn't much logic in Priest being introduced as his best friend. Reigns then reportedly also spoke up and agreed, and since it was someone with a pull like Roman Reigns, the idea was nixed. Now, there's no word yet on how Paul Heyman felt about the whole storyline, but it's ultimately Reigns and Owens are the ones who got it nixed eventually in the end. Now, Priest, as I mentioned, lost to Karrion Kross in the opening match of this week's NXT New Year's Evil special. Is said to be lost on the back of the Black and Gold brand right now, because he is still booked for a spot on the main roster, but nothing has been confirmed. Now, when it comes to this report that Dave Meltzer was saying on the Wrestling Observer Radio, he said as of Wednesday morning, Priest was now scheduled to be on Raw later this month, but everything related to the call-up is in the air and nothing is confirmed. Priest was ready to be called up for SmackDown last Friday, but the angle was booked just the day before on Thursday, and then they decided against it. The call-up actually wouldn't have went against the most recent policy, which says no one is to be called up from NXT unless it's been booked months in advance. That way they can finish other storylines and tie up loose ends. While the details surrounding the move for Damian Priest's move to the main roster are up in the air, it has been confirmed that he is scheduled for a spot on Raw or SmackDown in the near future. So if you struggle to follow that, you're not alone, because I have no idea, and I don't think WWE does, as to what is the situation with Damian Priest right now. So there is so much to break down in those stories there. So first of all, let's talk about Rhea Ripley. Rhea Ripley going to the main roster. To be honest, I'm stunned it's taken this long, frankly. Of course, she was on the main roster, essentially, in the build-up to her match against Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania 36 last year. She was making regular appearances on Raw. I think most people assume that the reason she was feuding with Flair served many purposes. One bit, giving Charlotte Flair something to do at WrestleMania and compete for a major title, because she wasn't going to compete for the Raw or SmackDown Women's Championship, and she's Charlotte Flair. She needs to be involved in a major championship program. around WrestleMania, so that was the case for her. So I'm shocked it's taken a further 12 months for Rhea Ripley to get called up. Obviously, there are other factors that play into it. When she lost to Charlotte Flair, there were then discussions about work visa issues, and then obviously the pandemic hit and things slowed down and she was off TV for a little while. She's even spoken about after losing to Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania last year, and this isn't in storyline, this is in terms of creatively backstage, she felt a bit lost because she had all of this momentum coming into 2020. She finally thought she understood her character, how she was supposed to present herself, how she was supposed to perform, and then once she lost to Charlotte Flair, she was kind of told to go in the different direction, and things changed and she didn't really know what was going on, and it felt like everything had been swept out from underneath her feet, as it were, so she was very confused, and maybe that's why it's taken 12 months. Ultimately, she's still very young, so I don't think she loses anything by not being on the roster for this year, considering what the 12 months has been in terms of the pandemic, in terms of WWE television. It's not like she's missed out, and it's not like they've missed the boat when it comes to Rhea Ripley. She's still got a ton to offer, and I'm very excited to see her get called up. It's about time, frankly. Where does she go? I would assume she would go to Raw. I think Raw needs her more than SmackDown. I think SmackDown's pretty healthy when it comes to the women's division. I think obviously you've got Sasha Banks, Carmella, Bayley, Bianca Belair. I think probably we're going to see Sasha Banks versus Bianca Belair at WrestleMania. At least that's when I'm looking at things and trying to read where they're going. That's the indication that I see. Given that Banks and Belair have been teaming up recently, I would suspect that's the direction for WrestleMania. In terms of Raw, who knows? I mean, the Raw Women's Championship, when was the last time that was defended? It feels like the Raw Women's Championship is kind of on hold. Asuka has held it, but she's been doing everything but defend that Raw Women's Championship. She's been involved in tag teams now with Charlotte Flair and Lana, been involved in a match against Sasha Banks at Survivor Series. It just feels like the Raw Women's division is kind of in chaos, and they have obviously been hurting because some of the biggest stars in that division aren't on the roster at the moment. Charlotte Flair's just come back, but you still got Becky Lynch, Ronda Rousey, etc. still missing. Nevertheless, there's still lots of talent on that roster. Lacey Evans, Peyton Royce, Nia Jax, Shayna Baszler. I could go on, and they're not being used in that Raw Women's Championship scene, which seems bizarre to me. So I would suspect rather that Rhea Ripley would go to Raw. That makes the most sense to me. Given that she's being called up now, you would hope that there is at least some discussion of what she would be doing at WrestleMania. I know essentially we've seen these reports, right, that WrestleMania 37 is almost going to be like the rematch from WrestleMania 36 because so many matches, or the matches that WWE couldn't do last year or didn't do the way they wanted to last year, they're going to redo again. I wouldn't be shocked in the slightest if we see a scenario where Rhea Ripley wins the Royal Rumble and then challenges Charlotte Flair for the Raw Women's Championship at WrestleMania. Maybe it's a reverse scenario of what happened last year. I wouldn't be shocked. So I think Rhea Ripley will go up to Raw, and I think she's best suited for that brand. As far as Damian Priest on SmackDown, I agree, to be honest, with what Kevin Owens was saying, if that report is accurate, that if Damian Priest was brought in to be Kevin Owens' best friend and suddenly, I need someone to face Roman Reigns and Jey Uso, oh no, I'll call up my best friend Damian Priest. When have they ever been best friends? It's well documented that it's not that they're not friends, it's just that connection just has come completely out of nowhere. I mean, it kind of is insulting logic, and there's never been any indication that they're really close friends, off screen or on screen. So it just doesn't make sense. I agree with Kevin Owens in that sense. It really doesn't make sense. And also, like the report says, this is very crucial there. We heard those reports a couple of months ago that going, well, you know, with NXT being the third brand now and they're not developmental, they're the main roster like Raw or SmackDown. If WWE wants to have a main roster call-up, it has to be planned way in advance so you can tie everything up when it comes to NXT and they can have a smooth transition to Raw or SmackDown. Well, it looks like with WWE's day-to-day writing of shows and day-to-day planning of shows and segments changing and total shows changing, suddenly we need Damian Priest for SmackDown. They do this on Thursday. We need Damian Priest for SmackDown. Why? Because he's Kevin Owens' best friend now. Why? How does that work? So Damian Priest goes there for SmackDown, and then they go, whoa, pump the brakes. This makes no sense. This makes no sense. And I feel sorry for Damian Priest now because that was nixed, but the call-up is still on. Dave Meltzer's then saying now he might go to Raw. If he goes to Raw, what's the plan for him to go to Raw? Because the plan as of this time last week, is that he was going to be on SmackDown. Now he's going to go on Raw, which would imply that there are no plans for him on Raw, or the plans for him to go to Raw are very short term and they've just been decided in the last few days. That would concern me if I'm Damian Priest as well. I get it, it's pro wrestling, everything's always in flux, but the sheer lack of planning right now when it comes to the way they write the shows, the way they write their segments, the way they plan out their storylines, it's just pure chaos. It's pure chaos. And it reaffirms my point I've mentioned time and time again here. A WWE writing job is arguably the most redundant job in the world. Because you can spend 6 days of the week writing, scripting for SmackDown or Raw. You work 6 days on it. Okay, this is my promos I'm writing. This is the segments I'm writing. This is the angles I'm writing. You get your notes from, I don't know, Bruce Pritchard, the executive director of Raw and SmackDown. Okay, this is what we want you to do. You want to work on this, 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 and this. Okay, you go, right, I've got 6 days. I'll do that. Day of the show, Vince McMahon looks at it and goes, no, I don't like it. Get rid of it. Start again. It's like, well, what did I do? What did I spend the last 6 days doing? Nothing. Writing fan fiction that's never going to see the light of day. It's madness. So I empathize. I really empathize and I sympathize with the writers because they must just be tearing their hair out. I sympathize and empathize with Damian Priest because I bet he doesn't have a clue what's going on now. And they mentioned it in the report. He almost is lost when it comes to NXT now because he's not on NXT. He's kind of in purgatory because he's not in NXT. He's been written off of NXT television. He's been written out of NXT storylines because he lost to Karrion Kross. But does he go into SmackDown? Is he going to Raw? I don't even think he knows, and I don't even think Vince McMahon or the creative team knows. That would be concerning if I'm Damian Priest, because he's got such an upside. He's got a huge upside. He can have so much success, and he might think, right, this is my big break. I'm going to get called up to Raw or SmackDown. What are your plans? We don't know. They change every 5 seconds. Alarm bells would be ringing. Alarm bells would be ringing. Because if plans are changing all the time, that's when bad plans start to happen. That's when bad plans start to be written up. Just because ultimately, as a writer for WWE, if plans keep getting changed and changed and changed, what do you do eventually? You write something that you know Vince will like. And when you write things you know Vince will like, that doesn't mean it's good or that doesn't mean it benefits the superstar at hand like Damian Priest. That would be a massive concern for me. That would be a huge concern for me. So we'll have to wait and see what happens to there. But certainly going to be interesting as we get these call-ups over the next couple of weeks. We got some news on the Royal Rumble. Specifically, are we going to have fans in attendance? Of course, the answer is no, because WWE reportedly is not planning on allowing fans in attendance at the 2021 Royal Rumble pay-per-view. Now, WWE previously announced that Tropicana Field in St. Petersburg would be a closed set for Raw, SmackDown, and pay-per-view events. But there had been a lot of speculation on WWE possibly having fans inside the stadium for the Royal Rumble pay-per-view, as this has been really the main goal for WWE for at least the last 3 or 4 months, I would say. That's been their goal. Let's get fans back into the arenas for January's Royal Rumble pay-per-view. I think part of the reason, in addition to the NBA coming back and moving out of the Amway Center, was if we can move to a bigger stadium, we can have greater social distancing. I don't know, it's not open air, I don't think. That might have been an issue too, but we can at least have greater social distancing. It's in the state of Florida as well, and the Florida government have said to WWE, and all sports teams for that matter, you can have as many people as you want inside the stadium, which is ludicrous. It's madness in a pandemic that they would want to do that, but that is an option for WWE. But the goal was to have them back for the Royal Rumble. But in an update, local Florida reporter John Alba has added that as of yesterday, WWE does not have plans to include fans in attendance at the Rumble, according to multiple sources. It was also noted that plans, of course, are subject to change, but it looks like there will only be virtual fans in the Thunderdome crowd at the Royal Rumble. As I've mentioned, the 2021 Royal Rumble pay-per-view will take place on January 31. It's not surprising. It's not surprising that we're not going to have fans in attendance for the Royal Rumble later on this month. Why? Because, frankly, and I don't want to get too political into the climate of what this whole pandemic is like, but we're no real improvement as to cases, as to fatalities and all that kind of stuff. We're in no real improvement than we were last year in March when this whole first started. I think with this whole situation when it comes to WWE and trying to get fans back into the arenas, WWE ultimately have pretty much made it very clear they want to get fans back into the arenas, of course, as soon as possible, but they want to get them back in when they can do it on a big scale, on a large scale. They don't want to do what AEW is doing right now, where you say, look, you can come in at 5% capacity or 10% capacity. WWE always wants to be big. They want to do things big. They want to do things on a large scale. They don't want to have 1,000 or 2,000 people there. They want to have 20, 30, 40,000 people there. And I don't think they're going to bring fans back into the arenas, fans back into the stadiums until they can do that. I think that is ultimately their plan. And I think they were hoping that Royal Rumble in January would be the case where they could start to bring fans back in on that scale. But, you know, just look at the news. Look at the news or look outside. There has been no real improvement, as it were, as to this pandemic going away anytime soon. And ultimately, look, everyone wants to have fans back in the stadiums. I want to have fans back in the stadiums. Every pro wrestling fan, every sports fan, just any fan of life wants to see things go back to normal, want to see fans back in the stadiums, want to see fans back in the arenas, want to just have this all go away and we can go back to normal. Everyone wants that. But ultimately, safety is paramount here. And fans should only be going back into arenas. Fans should only be going back into stadiums once it's 100% safe to do so, or it certainly is way more safe than it is now. So as long as it isn't safe, as long as we're still in this current pandemic and we're still in this current climate, it's not safe to have 30, 40, 50,000 people attending a pro wrestling event in a stadium. It's just not worth it. And I know there are those people out there that either don't believe it, or they say, well, it's my right to go out to a stadium, or it's my right, or I run the risk, I don't care. It's not about you, it's about the people that are vulnerable, and they can get ill and they can get sick. So ultimately, WWE would want to do it, and I think now the new goal would be WrestleMania in April. Personally, even in April, I just don't know if I see it right now. I really don't. Yes, we have vaccines on the way, but yeah, then you have to look into distribution, you have to look into getting 1 or 2 jabs. There's lots of factors involved in there, and the logistics are very, very complex. And if you look at WrestleMania is 4 months away now? I know a lot can and will happen in 4 months, but over here, specifically in the UK, we're looking like we might be in lockdown once again. We are in lockdown right now, but we might be in lockdown until April, until March, April, earliest February. So there is still a lot that is worrying right now, and attending a pro wrestling event just isn't what is important. It's not what's important right now, and that's the situation. So we're going to have the WWE Thunderdome virtual fans once again. It's going to be different, of course, seeing the Royal Rumble take place in that kind of setting. It almost feels crazy that 12 months ago, wasn't it? It was that we had that big Royal Rumble event, and you had 50,000, was it 60,000 people there, live fans, and you had Edge return and Drew McIntyre's big moment. That just seems like a lifetime ago. It just does seem like a lifetime ago, but ultimately that's the world that we're living in right now. We have some news also, some update when it comes to CARLITO, and why didn't CARLITO appear at Raw Legends Night on Monday. Now, it was initially reported that CARLITO and CANDICE were not able to appear on this week's WWE Raw Legends Night as advertised due to travel issues. Then it was reported that they weren't to attend, or they didn't attend. Nick Houseman of Wrestling Inc. reported that WWE had sent feelers out to a variety of talents, including CARLITO, but some internally in WWE just assumed that they were appearing and jumped the gun in terms of advertisement. I didn't buy that when we spoke about that yesterday. I said that just felt a bit, I don't know, guesswork. This is still a very high level production when it comes to WWE, and there were graphics, there were advertisements on TV. It's one thing being advertised on WWE.com and saying, oh, Carlito's going to attend, and then tapping it out, tap it on my laptop here like that. That's one thing. But when it comes to actually being advertised and put together on graphics and television adverts, that has to go through various levels of approval. So I just didn't buy that. But Carlito's absence from Raw, there's been an update provided by Mike Johnson of PW Insider Elites.com. He noted the following, quote, I was told that Carlito found out he was just getting a cameo and said, hey, but thanks. When you want me to come wrestle or do something, I'm happy to do it. I don't want to travel across the country just to do a 2-minute cameo. If you watched the video yesterday, that's essentially what I said would probably likely be the case, because that was the situation. If you watch Raw Legends Night, I don't think it was too hard to guess why he probably didn't go there. If you watch Raw Legends Night on Monday, you saw that these legends were on screen for 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. They were cameos backstage. And if you're Carlito, I mentioned it yesterday, why would you, if you got that creative, because usually, not all the time, but they would get the creative before Raw, or at least on the day, or when he's talking to him on the phone, they go, okay, do you want to come to Raw Legends Night? Absolutely, sure. What am I doing? You'll be involved in a backstage segment. Okay, what would that segment involve? Well, Randy ought to come up to you and maybe have a go at you and then leave. Why would I travel across the country to do that? I get the payday, and I get that money's tight, and I get that maybe it'd be a good payday, and it'd be good to have that money in the pocket. But why would you travel all the way across the country during a pandemic, risking yourself getting sick, to do a 2-minute cameo backstage. What a waste of time. What a waste of time. So I don't blame him if that's the case. I still don't buy the story of, well, it was just a miscommunication and WWE jumped the gun in terms of advertisement. Don't buy that. I just don't buy that. I think the idea of getting that creative and go, no, why would I travel that? Why would I do that? I think that's much more likely, so I think that's the case there. But speaking of Raw Legends Night, we also have an update of Candice Michelle, because she did speak to Wrestling Inc., and I think this is where they ultimately got their story from. She did an interview with them on their website, and she said, quote, "It was falsely promoted. I was never asked to be there. I would have loved to be there. I love WWE anytime they call me. Super honoured to go there and be called a legend. And as we know, for whatever rhyme or reason, I just wasn't meant for that show. But having you feature me on your website is kind of better, because I'd probably be on the stage doing nothing with 30 other people who are much more famous than I am. And now I get to come on here and actually do have a nice little moment with you guys and talk about how we get a cut in life. Full disclosure, I've just been busy at home. I had no idea they announced me. I was actually in Orlando, which is ironic, and I was hanging out with Tori. We got to go to Disney World, having a magical time, and she told me about how she was going to Raw, and I was like, oh, what are you going to do? Legends Night. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. And I just didn't think that I was invited. So that's the case with Candice Michelle. Legitimately for her, I guess there were people to reach out to. They never reached out to Candice Michelle. That list appeared, and they advertised her. But as far as I'm aware, Candice Michelle never made the TV adverts in the case of CARLITO. I think it's a different scenario there. I think that when it comes to the CARLITO story and the Candice Michelle story, they've spoken to Candice, that's the situation they've got, and they've just gone, it's probably the same with CARLITO. That's not really journalism. That isn't journalism. So I think that's the situation there. As far as Candice Michelle, she was just never invited. She was never invited, so she was probably put on that list on WWE.com. That's why she didn't get featured. CARLITO, I think it's different. I think ultimately it's different there. We have an update when it comes to the ratings for this week's Wednesday Night Wars. Of course, this week featured 2 TV specials, so people were expecting big numbers, but then, of course, Wednesday, it was just chaos, wasn't it, on cable TV and just TV in general and in the United States. So the ratings took a dip, to say the least. But ultimately, AEW Dynamite saw defeated NXT once again in viewership and ratings. Now, the numbers are courtesy of PW Torch this week, because Showbuzz Daily has delayed the ratings due to the holidays still hanging over. But Wednesday's New Year's Smash Night 1 edition of Dynamite reportedly drew 662,000 live viewers, which is down 32% from last week on TNT, with a 0.25 rating, which is also down 37.5% in the key 18 to 49 demographic. Now, as I mentioned, the numbers are way down from the previous week's Brody Lee Celebration of Life edition of Dynamite, which drew 977,000 live viewers with a 0.40 rating in the key demographic. In comparison, Wednesday's New Year's Evil edition of NXT drew 641,000 viewers, which is up nearly 10% on USA Network, with a 0.16 rating, which is up 33.3% in the key 18 to 49 demographic. These numbers are up from last week's show, which drew 586,000 viewers with a 0.12 rating in the key 18 to 49 demo. Now, obviously NXT went up, and I'm sure they'll be happy about that. They would have hoped that it would have gone up more, and I think AEW would have been hoping they could have continued the high numbers that they've had over the last few weeks. But obviously, people's minds and attention was drawn elsewhere due to other events going on in the United States on Wednesday. The cable news channels, I would assume, were way, way high up on the viewership and demographics, because everyone was watching cable news with that just incredibly scary events that were happening Wednesday in the United States, in the capital. And as I mentioned before on social media, I hope everyone that was there in the building was safe, and I completely do not condone any of that. It's disgusting, it's horrific, and it's just incredibly sad to see. But my thoughts go out to all the Americans there. But it was horrible, absolutely horrible, and rightfully so. People's attention was diverted to cable news to see what was going on with their country at that period of time, and just ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, when events like that happen, pro wrestling isn't important. We all love pro wrestling. We write about it. I talk about it here on the channel. We've got over 2,000 subscribers here on the channel that talk about it, love to talk about it, love to watch it, and all that fun stuff. But ultimately, when real life stuff like that happens, it's not important. It's not important. And people were obviously watching the news to try and figure out what was going on with all of that fallout in Washington, D.C. And it was horrible to see. It was horrible to see. And it was disgusting, frankly. And I don't want to get too political, because we talk about pro wrestling here, but it was shocking. It was absolutely shocking. So that's the issue when it comes to the ratings. On Wednesday nights. We have an update as well when it comes to Timothy Thatcher and the Fight Pit match that was scheduled for New Year's Evil. Obviously, it was cancelled or postponed in the Fight Pit 2 segment with Tommaso Ciampa and Timothy Thatcher from this week's New Year's Evil event. And reportedly, WWE NXT Superstar Timothy Thatcher is reportedly not suffering from a legitimate injury. Now, as I mentioned, it was announced on Wednesday that the Fight Pit 2 between Thatcher and Tommaso Ciampa was pulled from NXT's New Year's Evil special due to a minor injury that Thatcher had suffered during training for the match. NXT General Manager William Regal added that Thatcher will undergo some rehab and return shortly, and then he and Ciampa will settle their differences. Now, in an update, PW Insider has reported that they announced the injury to Thatcher just for storyline purposes, and he is not actually injured. The decision was made to push back the Fight to Pit match, possibly due to logistics, and they used the injury to Thatcher to cover the story. Now, the Fight Pit bout has been scheduled to take place in the coming weeks, but the makeup date has not been decided on. This is essentially what I said yesterday, that if you actually look at it logically, it didn't make any sense to have the Fight Pit on the New Year's Evil special. Not because it's not a big enough match, it's a big special, but ultimately it's a 2-hour show on Wednesday. You've got big matches, Damian Priest carrying Cross, you've got last women's standing match, you've got an NXT Championship match main event. How do you fit in the Fight Pit in there? This is a big gimmick match. You obviously have the logistics of putting together the Fight Pit. That would take time. In addition to that, this is a specialty gimmick match that should last 15-20 minutes. How do you fit that in on the show? Because if you have to cut the time, it's not worth doing. So to me, it didn't make any sense. It just didn't fit into that show because it was just too much. It would have been too much on the show. So for me, it made more sense to have it either in a main event of an upcoming episode of NXT, because that's where it should be, the main event. In comparison, also, you had a main event that was incredibly stiff. It was a Fight Pit without the Fight Pit between Finn Balor and Kyle O'Reilly. So again, it didn't make any sense. So I would suspect it's going to be on an upcoming episode of NXT in the main event, which is where it should be, or it could open, say, NXT TakeOver on February 14. I think that's a likely destination for it. I think it's going to be physical. I think it's going to be stiff. I'm a big fan of the match type, so I think that's the situation there. That makes the most sense to me. It's what I predicted was the case when it comes to that, and I think it's the right decision. Logistically, that makes total sense to me. We have some interesting news I want to talk about with Tony Schiavone, because Tony Schiavone has revealed on a recent episode of the AEW Unrestricted podcast that he actually held talks with WWE before signing with AEW in 2019. Now, they did a sort of rundown of what Tony Schiavone had been doing in the lead up to him signing with AEW, and he spoke about working at a radio station, losing that job, working at Starbucks briefly, and then he mentioned about doing the podcast, what happened when with Conrad Thompson, and then he spoke about Bruce Pritchard, because of course Bruce Pritchard has the Something to Wrestle podcast with Conrad Thompson, and then he got rehired by WWE in 2019, and essentially Bruce Pritchard said to Tony Schiavone, look, this is the situation, I want to bring you back in, I'm going to speak to Vince, we'll get you back in. Tony Schiavone's like, great, that sounds good to me, I'm all about making money. So the idea was to bring Tony Schiavone back in a producer role. So they have the discussion with him, Bruce then brings him back a couple of weeks later and said, Vince wants you to bring you in, we want to have you as a producer, not a commentator, we want you to work behind the scenes. That's the situation. Schiavone's like, cool. So he hangs up the phone. He then calls up Conrad Thompson and says, look, I just got a job offer from WWE. Conrad Thompson's like, great. Hangs up the phone, texts Cody Rhodes and says, Tony Schiavone's going to go to WWE. Cody Rhodes then starts messaging Tony Schiavone saying, I don't want you to work for Vince McMahon. I don't want you to work for Vince McMahon. He says, can I set up a call with Tony Khan with you? So Tony Khan then starts speaking to Tony Schiavone. He's then at the time, he's not decided he's going to go to AEW. And he's weighing that up, saying, well, I've got an offer from WWE, I've got an offer from AEW, what's going to happen here? And essentially it comes to SummerSlam, it comes to August of 2019, and he gets a phone call from WWE HR, and they say, thank you, Mr. Schiavone, for your interest, but we're not interested in signing you. There's no offer here. And Schiavone's like, you called me. You wanted me. And he's like, okay. So then he signs with AEW. The rest is history, and he's doing a fantastic job with AEW right now. Tony Schiavone has had a complete career resurgence. I think he's really a bright spot. The AEW commentary team, it has some criticism. Some people like it, some people don't like it. I think Schiavone is the best on there. Obviously, I'm a huge Jim Ross fan. Is Jim Ross what he once was? I don't think so. But let's face it, he still is a much better commentator than some people can ever be, even at this stage in his career. But who I think is really the best on that commentary team is Tony Schiavone. He hasn't missed a step. If anything, I think he's better than he was during his days with WCW. He's just fantastic. So to think that that might not have happened and think that Schiavone might not have been on TNT is just crazy. It's just crazy to think at this point. But it goes to show WWE's mentality in 2019 of knowing people that might be interested in going to AEW. They just tried to suck them all up, essentially. And that's the situation when it came to WWE in 2019. They signed everyone to 5-year contracts. They were bringing in people that maybe they didn't have any interest in bringing in. Remember all of those producers they signed in 2019 that eventually got furloughed or let go? Why? Because they didn't want them to be involved with AEW. And it goes to show the same with Tony Schiavone. And that was a really interesting story that he said there when basically, you know, Bruce Pritchard trying to get his friends back into WWE. That's par for the course in business and pro wrestling anyway. So I'm not going to criticize Bruce Pritchard for that. But they have him essentially on hold for months and months. And then they call him up, a HR person, not Bruce, not Vince, a HR person calls out Tony Schiavone and goes, thanks, but no thanks. Thank you for your interest, but there's nothing for you. And he's like, but Bruce asked me. I didn't go begging for a job, and now you're acting like I am. It's just bizarre, absolutely bizarre how that company works. But to Tony Schiavone, ultimately, it all worked out for the best because he's in the exact place that he should be right now, and that's AEW on TNT. We have an update as well when it comes to a potential comeback by Sean X-PAC Waltman, because WWE Hall of Famer Sean X-PAC Waltman has announced on Twitter that he is scheduling to have ACL and meniscus surgery. Waltman revealed he's meeting with his orthopedic surgeon on Monday to schedule the surgery. He also said he wants to be as close to 100% as possible if he does decide to return to the ring. He tweeted, quote, meeting with my orthopedic surgeon on Monday to schedule ACL and meniscus surgery. I need this done even if I don't have another match. It's been this way since 2007. I just learned to work around it. I can still work around it, but I want to be as close as 100% as possible if I'm going to have a few more matches. Now, as we spoke about previously here on the channel, Waltman revealed back in December that he was cured of hepatitis C and has about half a dozen matches in him. To me, it sounds like he really wants to do this comeback, and I really credit him for wanting to get back in the ring. I credit for him for fixing himself up, curing himself of hepatitis C, getting the surgery. We know that he's been clean and sober for a while now. He looks to be in the shape of his life. If you've seen him over the last sort of 18 months or so, he's in fantastic shape. And I always say this when I speak about Sean Waltman, X-PAC. First of all, criminally underrated in the ring. Absolutely fantastic in the ring. And I think if he gets healthy, and he says he has half a dozen matches in him, I think maybe even more. I mean, he looks fantastic, and even with all of the injuries he's had on the indie scene, he could still go. He can still go, and there is so much he could offer. Back when he was with WWE in the Attitude Era, he was a veteran. He was about 25 years old there because he's been doing it so long. He would always tell these stories of Vince McMahon would send people to work with X-PAC because that's how he would check that they were ready to go higher up in the card. They would do the same with Chris Jericho, The Rock, etc. All of those guys, they would work with X-PAC, and then if he gave them the seal of approval, Vince McMahon said, right, we can do something with you, because X-PAC was just that good in the ring. So I think he's criminally underrated, and again, people forget how young he truly was during that time in the Attitude Era. As I mentioned, 25 years old. They called him the Kid for a reason, because he was really young. So fast forward all these years later, he's what, 46, 47 or whatever? In the grand scheme of things in pro wrestling, that's nothing. Edge is back in the ring at this point, and he's about 46, 47 as well. Is X-PAC going to come back and be a full-timer? Absolutely not. He said that himself. That's just not happening. Can he come back for the occasional match? I would like to see it. And I know people might say, well, that's hypocritical. You criticize Goldberg coming back and these other legends coming back and not making stars. Why would you be so encouraging of having someone like X-PAC come back? Because X-PAC understands the business. X-PAC understands how to make new stars for the future generation. I see it the same as whenever Mick Foley used to come back in WWE. Every time Mick Foley used to come back, he used to lose. And he used to elevate a new star, whether that is Randy Orton, whether that is Edge, whether that's CARLITO. He wanted to do it for Jon Moxley in WWE as well. That's what Mick Foley wanted to do with his last few matches in WWE. And I see the same for X-PAC. If X-PAC comes back, is he going to win his matches? Probably not. Probably not. But what he will want to do is elevate new stars, give himself the send-off that he wants, and give himself some peace in the way that he finished his career. But ultimately, he would want to elevate new stars, help younger talent, and help take them to the next level. And I would love to see that in WWE, or specifically NXT as well. I'd love to see X-PAC compete on a NXT takeover. I'd love to see X-PAC compete in a future Royal Rumble. Is X-PAC going to be at the Royal Rumble at the end of the month? I highly doubt it. Next year, though, hey, anything's possible. Anything's possible. So fingers crossed he has a successful surgery, and hopefully we can see him back in the WWE at some point, maybe later this year or sometime next year. I think that'd be such a fantastic story. We have an update as well, a possible injury update when it comes to Nick Jackson. This isn't much of a story. This is just a bit bizarre, to be honest. So there was concern at one point that one half of the AEW World Tag Team Champions, Nick Jackson, suffered a broken leg during the opener of this week's New Year's Smash Night 1 edition of Dynamite. During the show's opener last night, the Young Bucks and SCU defeated the Acclaimed and the Hybrid 2 in 8-man tag team action. At one point, Jack Evans went up to the top rope for a 630, but Jackson got his knees up for the landing. It was noted by Brian Alvarez on Wrestling Observer Radio how Evans landed so hard that Jackson thought at first he might have broken one of his legs. Jackson did work one of the rest of the match though, but he was favouring his leg, and he also participated in the big show closing angle but was limited. In an update, Alvarez has reported on the Wrestling Observer Live that Jackson only suffered a leg contusion in the hard landing with Evans. The injury was not a broken leg as first thought. I know he might have thought initially that he broke his leg, but the fact that he was out there at the end, he seemed fine. Yes, he didn't do the super kick himself at the end of the show. It was Matt that did the super kick to Griff Garrison and Brian Pillman Jr., and actually Doc Gallows helped in that one. I don't think anyone thought, though, oh, that looks like he's got a broken leg. I know pro wrestlers are very tough, and I know you can break your leg and still walk on it, but at no point did I think, oh, he might have broke his leg. I just never thought that. So when the story came up of just to confirm Nick Jackson doesn't have a broken leg, well, okay, just to confirm I don't have a broken leg right now. No one thought anyone did. So that's the situation there. And finally, we have an update when it comes to the AEW console video game provided by Kenny Omega, because during the latest 2 show, or hosted by AEW Games, it was hosted by AEW Superstar and EVP Kenny Omega with this week's guest Kip Sabian. Now, during their conversation, Sabian asked Omega some question about the upcoming AEW console game. Now, the top question was about when fans would actually be able to play the game. Now, Kenny Omega, no shock here, didn't exactly give an exact date when it comes to when the game would be released, but said they were not going to rush out a product as they are looking to put out something that is not buggy and will have longevity with gamers. He said, quote, "We made kind of a lot of promises, and we want this game to be not only fun, but we want this game to last a long time. We want to make this game legendary. As you know, when games are rushed, they encounter a lot of bugs. They become almost unplayable, and they become a meme in themselves. We don't want that to happen. We want people to have fun with this thing. We want people to be competitive with this thing." Omega then noted that the beginning blocks of the game are feeling really good, and he's been able to get his hands on it for a short period of time. He then confirmed that the game will have a robust create a wrestler function. In regards to online competitive play, Omega said that would absolutely be in the game. Not only would fans have multiple ways to play against each other, but they are looking into having exclusive modes that are for online only. The AEW World Champion also hinted that cross-platform play could be an option for the game. Omega was then asked if the video game would have more of an arcade gameplay or a simulation gameplay, and he initially responded, neither. He said, quote, "Taking a look at the complete simulation-based wrestling game, the first thing that pops into my head is Fire Pro Wrestling. That has a huge fan base in its own right. However, I think there's a lot of people that find when you really take the simulation aspect and ramp it up too high, it eliminates the fun for people who just want to get in the game and mix it up with your buddies and really feel the speed and the fun that some of the older games were able to provide. Is it going to be full simulation? No. Do I want players to feel like when you're doing the moves that you're controlling the actual wrestling character? Yes, that's really important. I would expect speed in terms of arcade play, but moves, countering systems, submissions, all of that to feel like how you would feel in the ring with your opponent." So obviously, we're getting drips and drabs of this information when it comes to the console game. We are getting them. We know that's the case. I'm not a huge wrestling game player anymore. I was when I was younger. I had SmackDown 1, 2, Here Comes the Pain, Shut Your Mouth, Just Bring It. Some of the early, obviously, SmackDown vs. Raw, those games, and No Mercy, all that kind of stuff. I played those when I was younger, so once this game comes out, full transparency, I don't know if I get it. I might get it, and maybe we can do something on the channel with it. That might be quite fun. But it's easy, my point being, it's very easy to make all of these promises before it comes out. And ultimately, he is right, though. How many times do we see these news stories here on YouTube or just across video games where games are rushed out and then they're buggy and then they just become, as he mentioned, a meme. They become laughing fodder on social media. Cyberpunk, right? Cyberpunk's been pulled from certain stores because it's that bad across certain consoles. So that's the situation there. So it's easy to promise all these things, but I'm glad to see they're taking their time. We did actually a video to discuss the screenshots of it when it was first announced, and I don't know how you feel about that. To me, sometimes the graphics still look odd. I just remember the graphics being so much better like a few years ago, and now they feel like they've got worse. I don't know if that's just me. and having selective memory, I'm not sure, but it'll be interesting. And like I said, I don't know if I'll buy the game when it comes out. If we can do something on the channel, if that's something you'd want to see, you can let me know about that in the comment section. But interesting to hear some developments when it comes to the AEW video game. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So get involved with the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button. It really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to WrestleNews365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.